For this evening, I would like to introduce Isabelle Marquis. We're very pleased to have this food communication strategist with us. She who has more than 20 years of experience in food marketing. She has done multidisciplinary work in different fields. She is known for her rigor and her contagious passion, as well as her strategic tactics. Isabelle has inspired us and mobilized us through these different interventions that we've had with her and interactions we've had with her in recent years, and we're very pleased to have her with us this evening. Isabelle, I give the floor to you. Thank you, Sarah. And I want to thank the whole Regeneration Canada team. I am so pleased to be part of this this wonderful adventure, the Stories of Regeneration, which began last year, and I want to congratulate you on this initiative. Both of you, Alex and Sarah, mentioned that this is International Soils Day, and I don't know about you, but I'm discovering that it is International Soils Day. It's something that's of interest to me for a long time, and I wondered quickly to myself, why should we have an International Soils Day? The answer came pretty quickly when I thought about it. Well, without soils, we wouldn't eat. And if we didn't eat, we wouldn't be here. So it's a pretty quick link connection to make between us and the soil, but all the details about the importance of soils are much more complex and richer. And I'm so pleased to have this opportunity with the three other people who are here this evening to help you discover how important soils are to us and how they have a major role to play in climate change mitigation, as well as in preserving our individual health. Let us take a look in the next hour and a half. We'll look at several issues relating to all of this. Whether you have a farm or a garden, or you're simply interested in eating well and in sustainable development, I'm certain that this discussion will give you some interesting ideas that you can use to participate in this movement. So without further ado, I will introduce the three main speakers of the evening. I'll begin with this only man in the group, but that is Vincent Bolduc from La Station. He manages the farm called La Station. It's a cheese factory. They make organic cheese with his family. It is a fourth generation farm that has been practicing organic agriculture since 1995. They have 125 dairy cows and 1,000 acres of land. La Station uses both traditional and innovative methods, such as crop rotation, integrated to weed management, and others. Our second speaker is Rébeka Frazer-Chiasson. She is a farmer as well, works on a family project. She comes from a long line of farmers that goes all the way back to 1846, when the Chiasson family began working. She has a degree in social justice, and she thinks about the different injustices in the world, as well as being passionate about food sovereignty and the sharing of knowledge. So I'm so pleased that she is joining us this evening. She's also very involved in her community. And she knows that it's not just weeding and harvesting. So welcome, Rébeka. And our third speaker this evening is Marie-Élise Samson, who is assistant professor at the Faculty of Science and Agriculture at the University of Laval. Her fields of expertise include agricultural soils. And for those who wonder what that word means, that's agropedology. Okay, right? So that's the word, but agricultural soils, that's what it means. And she studies also the biogeochemical relations of soils. And with her involvement in different activities of knowledge transfer, Marie-Élise hopes to contribute to provide for the sustainability and the resilience of food systems by means of a systemic, transdisciplinary, and collaborative approach. Welcome and good evening, Marie-Élise. Thank you for joining us. Now, I would ask Rébeka and Vincent to tell us a little bit more about what I've just mentioned about your farms and about your work. Tell us a bit about. We'll start with Vincent. Good evening. I'm Vincent Bolduc from the Fromagerie La Station, Compton, and I manage the operations of the farm. We have to go out and see the animals in the morning. Depending on the season, we'll go into the fields. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a presentation about the farm. We have a family here. There's my mother as well, who was the person who brought organic farming into this, and also my father, Pierre, who was involved with the cows and the fields. We have two other brothers, Simon Pierre, who's in charge of the cheese factory, and Martin, who works on the maple syrup production. That's pretty busy during the winter. Pretty busy? Yeah, a little busy. We have a big team. We have an employee who's with us for a decade who works on cows operations. Marie-France also works on cow milking. We have some foreign workers because we have 125 cows after all. So we're not all alone. We have a good big team with us, and we have this vision to explain to people the importance of soils and animal welfare. I'm going to talk a little bit about buildings. We have a lot of energies that we use to increase the cows' comfort. Of course, in organic production, cows go outside. But now we have also a building that is well adapted to the animals' needs. We have a lot of fields in prairie. We also produce hay, which is different from the dry hay. This is different from some of the other dairy producers. This increases the quality of some of the feed we give at the farm. I think that basically covers it. That's a great introduction, and we'll come back. Indeed, we'll come back to some of these aspects. Now let's give the floor to Rébeka. Let's hear from you and hear about your farm. I'm on the cooperative Ferme Partagée, which is in Rogersville, in Mi'kmaq territory in New Brunswick. We're about 100 kilometers north of Moncton. For those of you who may have been here before, know the territory a bit. Isabelle was talking about the history, the last 100 years of history of the farm. we're a family farm, but we're also a workers' cooperative. We don't, in the farm is mainly devoted to new crops at the moment. Over the last 50 years, there weren't mixed crops, but that's what we're mainly doing now is organic vegetables. We do CSA and also farmers markets. What there used to be was a lot of livestock, and we're still doing some pork. Until recently, we had a small herd of cows. With the co-op, we have added some laying hens on pasture, which we keep during the summer. Also turkeys, and all of this is mostly sold locally. The 4 members of the cooperative, myself, Father Jean-Louis, my husband, Kevin Arsenault, and Pierre-Olivier Brassard, who was a member of another co-op in the Saguenay. And when that co-op split up, he was looking for another place to do agriculture. And we got to meet him. And we got acquainted, we had a trial year, and then we decided to form the cooperative with him as well. So we're the 4 founding members. But as Vincent said, there are other people who are involved in the team. On the photo with you, where you see the guy in the baseball cap, that's Philippe. He's been with us for 5 years about. And this year, we also had another employee who is now not just important field worker, but a member of the community, Marvin. And on the photo, you also saw Geneviève, who is the partner of Philippe. Sometimes we say it's shared land community because we are a commercial operation, and our goal is to remain profitable and to sell our production, but there's a lot of things happening at the family and community level also that we find important. I don't know if Isabelle, if there's something else I should add. I didn't. Here we see Kevin working on the potatoes. He's picking off potato beetles and some strawberries. When I got into agriculture, well, because I wasn't really much of a farmer when I was younger. I knew much less than other farm kids about this, but when I came back, I wanted to do organic strawberries. We've always done a bit with a lot of challenges, but it remains one of our special harvests, one of our special crops. Thank you, Rébeka, for this fine introduction. We'll come back, as we will, to Vincent with many more details in a few seconds, but I think you've already set the table for this. And now we're going to hear from Marie-Élise. As you heard when we introduced her, she is a major soil specialist, and we're very lucky to have her this evening. Marie-Élise, you have the floor, and we'd like to hear more from you about soil health. And after all, soils can be healthy, just like we can. Why it's important for them to be healthy, and how this also helps mitigate climate change. Great, thank you very much, Isabelle. And what I would say is that, well, I'm the one who feels really privileged to be able to have the opportunity to speak this evening. This International Soils Day, so it's a pleasure to be here today. I am absolutely passionate about soil. I understand the importance of soil. And when I can on a personal level, when I can transmit this passion to others and explain to people the importance of soils to life and on Earth in general, but also to our future generations, well, that's what really drives me. And it's hard to speak about soils without first speaking about this fabulous history, which is the history of soil formation. Soil formation is a fascinating story. To understand it, you've got to go back 450 million years, okay? At that time, the Earth was a big bowl of water with some rocky outcrops. There were no soils per se. There were no plants. There were no animals yet. There were no living organisms at that point. There were on Earth, as opposed to in water. And life took form on these rocky outcrops in the form of lichens. This is a photo from Rivière-du-Loup, where I lived for a few years. And what you see here is the birth of life on Earth, which we can still observe today. 450 million years ago, this was made it possible for life to migrate from the ocean to land. These rocks, which did not really support life at that time, were colonized by a symbiotic association which enables two living organisms to live together and to mutual benefit. That is, between an alga and a mushroom or a fungus that produces a lichen. The alga has a very interesting property, which is that of photosynthesis, being able to capture light and turn it into and use carbon from the atmosphere to form CO2 for their consumption. And so this uses the CO2 energy from the atmosphere to produce plant matter. As to the fungus, it has the property with its fungal hyphae to degrade the rock and to extract from it the minerals necessary to its growth. And these two organisms together had an advantage of working together. And that was advantageous to them. It enabled them to colonize a new environment, the land environment. And these organisms could establish on the rock. And gradually, these lichens, which were able to do photosynthesis and thus to do this, and so there was a deposit of organic matter on the rock, on the bedrock, and this created an environment which was conducive to the development of living organisms that were more complex. That is what I'm illustrating on the next slide.
So gradually, those lichens, it's a different type of lichen, they change the rock, and they then allow gradually for moss to settle into those areas more rich in organic matter and minerals, and eventually it allowed for the development of more complex plants like lycopods. And the deposit of organic matter on these rocks with minerals through the action of fungi and vegetable roots, and that creates some soil over the surface of the rock. And that's why we can observe today plants that are much more evolved, like bushes or trees that will grow on the surface of a rock. So this is the very slow and meticulous action of those organisms that leads to the foundation of soil. You must understand that it's a fascinating, magnificent process, but that is also very slow. It takes 100,000 to 1,000 years to form a single centimeter of soil. It really strikes the imagination. The soil that we have is a non-renewable resource. The speed where we expend the soils is greater than the speed at which they can be formed. Soil is also a unique and fascinating transition between the mineral world and living world. as I was saying earlier, there was just rocks, only minerals, things. And now with all the diversity of living organisms found on the surface of that rock, that's all thanks to that layer of history called soil. It's essential for living matter. For humans, 95% of what we eat directly or indirectly comes from soils. Soils is also a place of incredible biodiversity. Over a quarter of the planetary biodiversity is indeed in the soil. And soils, of course, are at the basis of life on Earth. And since time immemorial, they play a major, and you cannot replace it in the cycle of elements and water. And this is why life on Earth depends on the health of our soils, but they also play a great role in regulating climate through their role in the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. Yet, unfortunately, right now, AFA considers that a third of agricultural area is considered degraded. In parallel, there's a decline in productivity over about 20% of arable areas. So this means that our knowledge is improving, our technology is improving, but we're still absorbing on a global level decline in productivity over 20% of the arable land. This is directly related to the state and health of our agricultural soils. The estimate is that every year we lose 24 million tons of soil. It's huge. Some authors have also estimated recently that 14% of the arable areas on the planet have a life cycle of under the 100 years if we maintain actual agricultural practices. These issues are huge and are at the heart of the world that we know, and also the survival of the human race, I dare say. So here's a question. The question, how will we do to preserve this resource? It's a non-renewable resource. It's essential to life on Earth. So I'd like to remind you that in a natural state, soil is covered by a great diversity of plants that cover them in time over time and space. That's why soil is so important in the cycle, carbon and nitrogen cycles, also water cycles. But let's talk about the carbon cycle first. So as I said earlier, carbon is formed by photosynthesis in plants. So everything that's from the activity of plants and microorganisms in the soil, they're very rich in carbon. Carbon is the skeleton of living matter in soils. Also, a matter that was living but is now dead in the soil. This is, for example, plant biomass, plant roots, the macro and microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, the subproducts, secondary products of microbes, and this puts in organic matter rich in carbon into the soil. Natural soils are very rich in carbon and diverse forms of carbon. However, when we start to do agriculture and cultivate, we remove the natural vegetation, which is very diversified. And for each inch of soil, and we pass we plant it, and we plant the plants that interest us, and we only focus on the health and productivity of those crops. However, in parallel, there's microorganisms in the soil and microorganisms as well that are lacking some food and start to use the carbon that was there in originally for their microbial activity. And that means that eventually the quantity of organic matter and carbon in the soil diminishes. And the microorganisms end up just breathing out a large part of that carbon that goes into the atmosphere as CO2. So you'll understand that soils can act as a source of greenhouse gases for the environment. This is what happens when you do agriculture through plowing on the soil, when there are practices that are not necessarily favorable for soil or organisms, and the proper maintenance of the balance of organic matter in the soil. There is good news, though, that CO2 found in far too great quantities in the atmosphere. It's a major preoccupation given greenhouse gases, not only because of agriculture on land, but for its use of fossil fuels. The good news is plants can play a role at the forefront, really, in the fight against climate change, yes, but also in how to adapt to climate change. So through their capacity for photosynthesis, plants can extract a part of the CO2 in the atmosphere and accumulate it in their in the plants. So carbon is a bit the skeleton of the plant. It uses that gas to make vegetable plant materials, whether they're aerial or in the roots, and that material can return to the soil and stabilize through complexes with organic material. The estimate, according to the initiative Cat Promel, if we were managed to increase carbon stock in the soil by 0.4% in our soil, in the soil, we could have a major impact on the greenhouse gas and human-based greenhouse gases on a planetary scale. So this is not everything. And here, it's really important to understand the role that soil plays in the struggle against climate change. It's very important, but it can't be considered in an isolated way. So the carbon sequestration in soil is not only good for the fight against climate change, it also includes a whole slew of ecosystem factors that are essential for the proper functioning of agriculture and the planet in general. So plant matter, whether it's aerial or in the roots, when it goes back to the soil, it's a source of energy and also nutritional elements for soil microorganisms. So the soil microorganisms will use that plant material of their various origins for their metabolic processes, and through that they will release elements that are essential for the growth of plants. This activity will also produce organic molecules that have a strong affinity with particles in the soil. That will form small organomineral complexes. So the association between microbial elements in the soil. So these associations between the organic and the mineral will stabilize carbon in the soil over the long term and promote to the fight against climate change. In parallel to that, those aggregates will also play a major role in terms of establishing soil structure. What is this? Properly structured soil, it creates nice little aggregates, little groupings of particles and minerals that give the soil properties, improved properties in terms of physical and chemical and biological properties. So lovely aggregates. It's also a soil that has great retention capacity. It will act as a sponge after a rain. It's also a soil that where you have very hard, abundant rain, it will allow the water to, it will prevent flooding or stagnation of water at the surface. It's also soils that will have greater fertility in terms of chemical terms and better biological properties. It's a soil that will offer properties that will enable it to have better resilience in terms of sicknesses, plant sicknesses, and climate change and all the variations. And we'll know that will be so much more variation in the context of climate change, so that organic matter, rich in carbon, plays an essential role in the soil structure and life in the soil and the cycle of the elements And this has an impact on soil structure, life in the soil, and how it retains various components. And that all plays a role, an essential role for the various ecosystem functions played by agricultural soils. For example, protection against erosion, the protection of that very resource as well, maintenance of biodiversity in the soil as well, optimization of production that we're looking for in agriculture, climate regulation, and also regulation of the water cycle and of the water quality. Soil also acts as a sponge, buffer against pollution. In brief, a healthy soil is soil that is both more productive and more resilient. In that sense, you might ask yourself, why in an agricultural context are we seeking to nourish the plant when we could nourish the soil? You have to understand that nearly 60% of the nitrogen brought in by the plant, even when the plant is fertilized, does not come from the fertilizer itself. It comes from the soil. And if we want a soil that allows us to have a great productivity, you need healthy soil. And that opens up the question as to know, what is a healthy soil? So it's a question you have to ask around humans. What is a healthy human? How do you measure the health of a human? You might say VO2 max, it gives you an EMC. There's so many factors that you can measure, and social ones as well that come to influence health, human health. Same thing for soils. I like the definition provided by Jensen et al. In 2022. I would invite you to read that article. Anyone can read it. It's accessible to all. Jensen and his colleagues say that it's the vitality of a soil and maintaining the socio-ecological functions of the territory that surrounds it. What does that mean? Is the health of a soil, it's not just a qualitative and objective thing. It's not just to measure the quantity of microorganisms or the density or the pH of a soil in a very objective and quantitative way. It also includes a whole host of functions, a whole host of social values. What allows us to say that a soil is healthy is it's more related to the larger ecosystem where that soil is in a state of flux. It takes into account the notion of the well-being of the farmer, the community around the cultivated soil. It takes into account notions of ethics and equality and of guardianship, and also the water cycle, climate, biodiversity, and of course pollution. So it's really a very vast context that is very subjective and qualitative in a certain way. But it's very important to not go beyond, to just skip past those indicators when we're evaluating the health of a soil in general terms. What I really like in terms of regenerative agriculture, I find it's a concept that recognizes the importance of soils at a time when everything is in flux and as part of a whole system. What is regenerative agriculture? Well, here we seek to maintain biodiversity of the soils and the plants and the humans that surround that soil, to keep the soil covered over time and space, to keep strong root systems. Root systems play an essential role in the health of those ecosystems, to minimize plowing, to incorporate animals in a rational and ethical way. It's a concept that also includes reciprocity between the ecosystem and human beings. As I said, a soil is not in health if it is such that it modifies, it has a negative impact on the health of the human being working that soil. And it also includes an adequate management of the water cycle that seeks to preserve or even restore ecosystems. That includes concepts such as social justice, food security, and economic viability. In conclusion, I just heard my phone's ding. I set an alarm. In conclusion, it's important to bring back this image, the image of the small lichen. They're so beautiful, they're so diverse, that quietly degrading the rock to form soil, and to remind you that life on Earth depends on that slow work, but slow but steady work that those small the small organisms taken so much time to do. Life on Earth depends on a fragile equilibrium in the cycle of several elements and organisms, and we are part of it. We're not above that cycle, we are part of that cycle. And I'd like to repeat the words of Wendell Berry: what we do to our land, we do to ourselves. We're part of that cycle of elements and organisms, and the soil is a major player in how to recycle those elements and those organisms. So the attention paid to soils, I think, is essential to ensure that life on Earth, generally speaking, the maintenance of the diversity of organisms on Earth, including human beings. And for me, the first step towards the preservation of that resource is to understand the importance of soil, the scope of soil, and to talk about it. This is why I feel privileged to be among you today and trying to share my passion for soils and try to understand the beauty and the importance of that resource. And that's the first step. The second step, maybe as citizens, is to take that extra step and to encourage farmers who have preservation of that essential resources and non-renewable resource and have it at heart. It's important today. That's why Rébeka and Vincent, it's important that they're here. They're farmers who have the notion of protecting that resource at heart. It's an incredible resource. So thank you for listening. And it's my great pleasure to bid you a great World Soils Day. Thank you so much, Marie-Élise. What a lovely way to set the scene for our discussion. It's fascinating. I don't know, there's about 60 people here connected. Even me, who thought I knew quite a bit on this topic, I learned a lot of things. So thank you very much for that wonderful, really, you presented the whole picture of soil health and why it's important. So to make this even more concrete and relevant for everyone who's listening, let's go to Rébeka and Vincent. I did introduce you just now. You have a personal story, a family story with agriculture. It's very impressive. So you've been harvesting for a long time. I'd be intrigued to know, how long has soil health been of concern to you? How long has it been important to you? Was there an element that triggered all that for you in your life? In the generations that preceded you? Why does it concern you? Rébeka, would you like to start? It's funny. I took a few notes and I'm answering that question answered differently after having heard the Marie-Élise's presentation, because when I read it the first time, I couldn't say, and I was seeing it in a much more technical way with the graphic that showed the qualitative elements. I'd say it's been longer than what I thought, actually. I remember when I was a young person, my father, he'd gone to conferences. Well, I'm actually forgetting the word, but where they were talking about a more holistic health, soil health, and the impact on animals and humans. And I remember that must have surely had an impact later on when I went to university. And that's when I rethought about agriculture. As I grew up, it was never something that seemed viable or possible for me. But when I was seeing the links between that and social justice and food sovereignty and this idea of soil health as being at the basis of everything, of all those things. That's where I became much more interested. So I said at the start, about 10 years ago, I really feel I don't have the knowledge really that's as required, but it's been longer than that. It's been much longer than that. It's been part of my subconscious. It did clearly seem to connect with your personal values as well. I must imagine that it's an important factor on that front. Vincent, on your end, how did you come to be interested in soil health? That's a good question. Marie-Élise, we work every day with soil. I did learn something from Marie-Élise, that's for sure. It's as of a very young age. It's a bit like Rébeka at the house, at home. The vision of my parents and their vision of agriculture. We feed our to our animals. That's how we saw it. We feed the soil. A properly fed soil, it leads to good things. I'm just for the product you're making, be it cheese or animals, you have to properly feed the soil. That's what really I find value in. Establish your priorities, that you know that's not perfect. There's less value for the farmer. You have to really, as a person, I just try to make the best food, and it comes from the soil. That's what really I find so interesting. Doing something half, just by halves, but that's not what we want to do. We want to feed people. Organic came out of that. Quality of life for our animals came through that. All of those steps. That's what motivates me. That's what motivates me. Indeed. To go a bit further on that, what is it in your work as a farmer on a daily basis that has an impact on soil? Marie-Élise gave us a sense of that in our presentation very quickly. Certain elements, without necessarily going into detail. That's not what she was meaning to do. But you who are deep in it, your hands in the soil on a daily basis, Rébeka and Vincent, could you make it clear what your work as a farmer, well, what do you do as people in agriculture and, well, more conventional agriculture that has a positive or negative impact directly on the soil? Well, I could start for sure at the farm. Because the challenge is machines. We don't do everything by hand. We've asked questions around soil compaction. This affects enormously the life in the soil. So the timing of how you intervene chose picking the right time frames, and we live with temperature. We're not perfect either. We do as the best we can to the best of our knowledge. We do our work. Let's go through green fertilizers, try to plow as little as possible. In organic, we try to plow as little as possible. We try to minimize those impacts. And certainly in terms of the rotation with the goats and the cows, we have a lot of forage. There's many moments the fields are always covered, and then there's soya, a little bit of corn. When we do those crops, we try to incorporate green fertilizer in concrete terms that we're trying to do, and come at the end of the year to not have any bare soil. We want our soil to always have plants on them. This eliminates the challenges when there's the snow is melting and the temperatures are changing. That's what we do practically, but we always have to juggle temperature. We aim for perfection, but well, this year there was too much rain. That was the challenge. And it was interesting. Marie-Élise was speaking about soil quality and the effect of a healthy soil on resilience. we really see the difference in healthy soil and one that is less in good health on the capacity to receive water when it starts to flow over the soil. That's what we see. When you have good soil structure, there's better results, but they adapt better to changes in temperature when it's both when it's very dry and both when it's very wet. I found that interesting. What I'm retaining here, if I can just draw a few things out of what you said, some of your practices, it has machinery has a direct impact that compacts soil, and you have to be careful of that to maintain the soil such that it's always covered during every season. You also spoke of biodiversity, that cannot always grow the same thing in the same lot. I imagine because each plant complements each other or complete each other. I just at any rate, we could Rébeka, if you have it at the tip of your tongue there, would you have another element that I missed? So I'll go forward here. I see that time is passing, and I have 1,001 things I want to ask you. Thank you for that answer. That's very complete. Now, Marie-Élise, you could really feel it in your presentation, your passion for soils. One thing that intrigues me, yeah, you're teaching in university for 10 years, but you're an agronomist and you support farmers. When you go to a field, what indicates to you, what tells you, you just have to look at it, or after a few tests or some investigation, that the soil is in health? How does the soil speak to you? I love this question. I love this question because in truth, just the first thing you see can offer certain hints, but you don't have answers to your question until you really explore what's going underneath your feet. So to do that, you have to get your shovel out. You got the courage to get out the shovel and dig a hole to see.
Because as I said, soils are wonderful. And this beauty, this diversity is due to the complexity of these systems, among other things. The complexity of the different physical, chemical, and biological interactions. And so when the soil is a limiting factor in productivity or any other ecosystem services, you've got to take your shovel and dig in and see what's going on. And when you dig, you do it 1, 2, 10, 20, 50 times. When you get practice at doing this, you get practiced at the art of reading soil profiles. You'll start understanding the different interactions. You'll start understanding where the problem comes from, whether it has to do with the way water is moving through the soil, or is it related to underground drainage or compaction, which is causing water tables that are standing water that is harming root development, or is it also harming crop, preventing crops from taking root? And you have to have good agronomic baggage and knowledge in order to understand what's going on in the soil. You also need field experience. You've got to go out there and you've got to dig, and you got to do it quite a few times before you start to feel comfortable with it, and you're able to read the profile, which can be complex, but it's such a pleasure to dig a hole. And it's almost like a Sherlock Holmes game, or I love it. It's fun. I make the students in the fall course that I give. In fact, this afternoon, I was giving a presentation on a soil profile, and I sent them out wherever they wanted to go, anywhere in the province of Quebec, dig a hole. And I said, analyze what's going on there in that soil, both from the pedological or soil perspective and also the agronomic perspective. So tell me what you would tell a farmer. So it's a science, but it's also an art that you have to cultivate. And well, yeah, what I hope is that there will be ever more farmers and agronomists who will be more interested in soil science, and we have agronomists who are trained in order to help farmers with their concerns at this level. I imagine that as soon as you dig, everything that moves in the soil is probably a good indicator of what's going on. The root system, is it short, is it long, is it stunted? This is not my specialty, so I won't say too much here, but I can imagine that I imagine that these would be some indicators that would be quite simple in order to get a feeling for what's going on. And then you would need some more expertise to understand what's going on. And sure, anybody can dig a hole. That will open your eyes. If I can't even stick a shovel in, imagine what roots are encountering. Imagine how hard it is for them to get through. And that's why also agronomists are always saying, don't always go alone, go with the farmer and ask the farmer to help you dig the hole. That is one of the reasons, because we use all our senses in order to assess the health of a soil. And one of them is, well, the feeling, the resistance that you get against the shovel. I often see specialists smelling the soil and they say, well, yeah, it seems to be healthy. Others say, no, not so. Yes, there's the odor, and there's some agronomists who will even taste it, if you can believe that. Well, why not, after all? I'm talking about taste. Talking about the results here of a test. Vincent was saying that they can see the difference on their farm, and that's what motivates them. That's what makes them proud too. Rébeka, from your standpoint, you have a long history going back to the last century, 2 centuries ago, on this farm your family does. Are you seeing a difference in what you're growing, what you're harvesting, that as opposed above and beyond the plants themselves? Well, sure. Like I said, I don't feel like I don't know enough. I don't really feel competent enough, given all that we could know. But from the standpoint of organic matter and fertility, and how you can see the plants growing, we can see if the soil is healthy or not. And I was just thinking in terms of, well, you see how much attention is paid to the soil, and people who are closer to animals or who receive more manure or amendments, we see completely different results coming out of that. When I was growing up, it wasn't so much the case. We weren't producing plants for commercial sale, but they had their garden, which is a pretty big garden. And that was clearly the soil that was given the most love, the most manure, it was the most productive, the most healthy. So you can see the impact that this can have, just giving the soil some love, giving it the right amendments. I'd like to talk about animals a little bit, because in former times, if we go back to past that isn't all that far behind us, animals were part of the landscape. They were included in the model of most farms, but since the Industrial Revolution, there has been a separation, almost complete separation. You're either doing livestock or you're doing field crops. Oh, nowadays, you see that there's an important role that animals have an important role to play in the equilibrium of this type of system and in soil health. You both have livestock integrated into your farms. Can you tell us about the animals and what role they play and what contribution they make to your farms, not just in terms of the meat that they produce, but also how else, what other services do they provide, for example, to your market garden? Well, if it's okay, Rébeka, I could do it. All right. Well, my vision is to have a balance. We haven't mentioned it, but well, we produce wheat as well as soy and barley. We also produce forages for our animals, but a good part of that is what we produce is for human consumption. I think it's hard to find a business that mixes these. Hard to find also the balance between them, and I don't know the perfect balance, but I think it makes sense to have both animals and animal feed and also human food. We use the green manures, we use manure, animal manure, and we produce food for both animals and humans. We have to strike the right balance. When you have animals, you have forages, and the thing that's beautiful is that you have the prairie. And when you have a pasture put in, well, that'll be there for 5 or 6 years. Pasture will be there for up to 8 years. So this gives us soils that we don't have to turn over as much. We're not constantly disrupting them. If we said we were only going to do grain, then we wouldn't have those fields that were being left untouched for 8 years. Those plants that are fed to animals have the potential to contribute to soil health because they give back to the soil. And what they give back is different from what is given back by annual crops. Well, it's not just that either. It covers the soil entirely. That's the difference. It's that, even field crops are cropped in rows, right? But pasture covers everything. There's no space between rows. And this helps to keep the soil covered everywhere and at every point, so there's less runoff, less leaching. Without exaggerating, I think there's a balance to be struck in that cycle. So if I understand you right, it's better to have the marriage of the two is better than to have them separate. Well, as a farmer, that's really good because you work with both animals and fields, but it's also, or field crops, but it's also good for the resilience of the business from year to year, because this year was a tougher year in the field crops. In our region, there was a lot of rain. So it gives our business some extra security. The cows are dairy cows, so if we can produce, we also have, so we have cheese as well, and we also have our sugar bush. So, we're diversified in that way, and that's good for us. I find it good because it's another way to show how all of this and everyone is closely connected throughout the food chain, if I can call it that. I see that there are a lot of questions. I want to make sure we have time for them. But before we go to the questions from the public, I would like to go back to Marie-Élise very briefly. Could you help me clarify the terminology? You mentioned in your presentation regenerative agriculture, which is a set of practices of which we're increasingly speaking. A lot of people are starting to speak about it. Could you clarify the difference between sustainable, organic, and regenerative agriculture? There, after all, must be some subtleties there in those different definitions. What can you tell us about that? Oh, tough one. A big question that I've tried to answer to the best of my ability, but this will also be influenced by my personal opinion. I think that for a long time now, researchers, eaters, and farmers have known that we have to take better care of our soils. We have to rethink our way of producing food. And I think that has been involved in different movements, that has taken the form of different movements over time. Different movements such as, for example, conservation tillage, which took place for a few decades, returning crop residues to the soil and trying to reduce tillage and so on. There was also the organic movement, which developed in parallel with the use of pesticides and with no pesticides and no chemical inputs. So we said, okay, either we're organic or we're not organic, and there were certain ways to be organic, which has an advantage because it enables the consumer to have the certainty when they buy a product of the conditions under which the product was grown. But there's also some downsides to that, because there are other practices that could be beneficial to soil health and other ecosystem services that are delivered by the soil, which are not necessarily covered by organic. For example, organic agriculture can use so-called organic pesticides. Organic pesticides are not synthetic pesticides. They come from molecules that are just available in nature, but that doesn't mean that they have no impact on soil organisms or on human health. So regardless of that, I have had a similar question. Is it organic agriculture, permaculture, conservation agriculture, or regenerative agriculture? What is it, after all, that's the best for us? And what I want to tell them is, well, the model that I think is best has to be defined in terms of the person working the land, with consideration for the ecosystem and the system in which that land is embedded. So I don't think it is black and white. I don't think it's one way or another. I don't think that under every circumstance, every system would be better than another. One system would always be better than another. And what I like about regenerative, even though I want to be totally frank with you and critical, we don't necessarily know what it is. What's the definition? Is it clear? What I like about this concept, it is based on principles that are laudable and inclusive. That means that you're not either regenerative or non-regenerative. It means it includes everybody who is in transition towards healthier modes of production, and that are trying for higher biodiversity, better social, environmental, agronomic, and soil health. That's what I like. I might like that about any other concept, to be quite frank with you, but what I like is it's not black and white. There's no battle to be fought. There's no like, well, hey, you're tilling, but you're not tilling, but you're using a lot of pesticides. You're tilling, but you're not using a lot of pesticides. This helps to unify people, unite people in working for something better, which responds to the context in which this is developing. Soils are so different. Soil climate, economic contexts are so different in Canada, all across Canada and around the world, that you can't identify one way of producing that is good everywhere. And that is a reality that you have to accept. And I think we then have to look for something that can unite us, that can mobilize us, so we're all walking in the same direction. but in the way that suits each of us. I think this is a key message, which is very promising, which is that every soil is unique. And I want to also draw a parallel with human beings, because everything is very closely tied. I've heard farmers tell me about their field with respect to the neighbor's field. They're just, they're a couple meters away and they're saying, look, they don't have any water or trees, or the chemistry of their soil is completely different. And so thinking of a universal model, an identical model from one that would, or one size fits all, would not be appropriate. Now a question from the public. What would be the simplest ways to improve soil health? You all have different practices that are conducive to soil health. Is there one or several of these practices that is easier to begin with, for example? Although I've said that each soil is unique, maybe there are certain practices that are maybe easier to start with for certain people. Which of you would like to field that question? Or what do you do in particular? Rébeka, Vincent, what would you say are the easiest practices that you have adopted to contribute to your soil health? Well, I think it's just a matter of getting started. It's not black and white. You got to try things. And I think the easiest thing is green manures. Well, that's what really delivers the greatest impact on soil health as a farmer. It's on our yields, because you're improving soil structure. Those plants will be bringing nitrogen to the soil if they're nitrogen fixers. You'll be able to measure higher yields. So on the farm, yes, green manures. We put them everywhere, on every field that's available, depending on when or what time of season. It's not do we do it or not, it's we do it as much as possible. And it's the one that's easiest. Sure, of course, you got to go out and plant, you've got to plant these fields, so it's a big challenge, but you discover that this is a tremendously profitable practice over time. You don't even have to. I guarantee you that you get a better yield out of those fields after doing that. It's not just a practice that's good for soil, it's good for the farmer, it's good for everything. That's the first one, I would say. Start with green manures. Okay, what about Rébeka? We don't have the same area as Vincent, but we have a lot of annual crops or in vegetables. But as to green manures, one of the ones we use is a lot to keep the soil covered, but also because one of our immense challenges is weeds in vegetable production is using buckwheat, because it is very competitive and it will clean up a weedy field very nicely. That's a tremendous advantage that a green manure can give us. It can outcompete the weeds and give you a lot of crop residues to reintegrate into the soil, into the bargain. Interesting. So you use a kind of a nurse crop, an edible nurse crop, to fight off the weeds, clean up the weeds. You kind of keep nature which wants to take over at bay by doing that. Now, Hades, have you got anything to add on this point? Very quickly, I just wanted to speak to the previous question, because this is something I've been thinking about since they said it. What Rébeka was saying, well, it's hard, I don't know, I feel ignorant, I don't feel competent, and so on. I just want to say that us scientists, after spending 6, 8, 12 years in laboratories, reading papers and so on soils, we feel the same, just so you know. Soils are complicated things, and that's wonderful because, and we need to be interested in them, and we're not very interested as a society. So this is I think this knowledge is quite limited in general. I don't worry about talking about soils and soil science, even though I know that maybe in 5 years the science may say the opposite, because I know that I have to help things along. And if I do it, it's because I know that there are farmers that are on the ground, they have knowledge that's complementary to mine, and they're going to be helping it along too. So we need to work together on this. I would invite everyone to not feel like an imposter. Talk about what you know about soils, share it as much as you can, and let's move this along together. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marie-Élise. Now that leads us to the next question. Is there in Canada a project for farmers to measure the level of life in their soils without too much cost to them? I think there are some grants and stuff that are available, but Regeneration Canada, aren't you involved in certain projects like that? Marie-Élise, you may have some thoughts about that. That seems like a question that might be to me. Well, as I said, it's very hard to measure soil health because it includes concepts that are very subjective and qualitative rather than quantitative. But of course, you've heard of the Sustainable Agriculture Plan of the government of Quebec and so on. I'm a member of the research network in this province that was developed in that context and developed in the context of the Sustainable Agriculture Plan. The idea is to develop tools that will enable us to make life easier for farmers to make decisions, make it easier for farmers to make decisions so that they can optimize certain ecosystem services that farms provide. Have we got there yet? If you write to labs, they will offer, sorry about anglicisms, but they will offer a whole package of indicators of soil health, but it's all based on the scientific literature, which may not be suited to Quebec, may not apply to Quebec, but there's with increasing amount of statistics and measurement methods that are being developed, which give us access to increasingly large databases. Well, we're starting to come to a place where we might be able to develop tools to help farmers make decisions that would be better suited to our Quebec growing conditions. This is something that we need to look at as the years go by, but this is all thanks to the growing interest on the part of the population and the government in soils. This is not something we ever heard of before. Farmers and researchers, sure, they were interested in soils, but we didn't feel that there was any kind of mobilization, societal mobilization around soils. But we are feeling that now. We have pretty significant momentum here, and we have to keep on surfing on this wave as long, in case the wave should blow over. And Philip has a question here concerning the general agronomic education that's given in university faculties. Yes, I read that question. I liked it too. If you're passionate about soil health, you might get the feeling that that our university education tends to revolve around chemicals. It's a science that is emerging and starting to develop new tentacles it's a chicken and egg thing, okay? Because you see, that's the best way I can put it. We don't have a lot of agronomists who have been trained in soil science at this point in time. One of our colleagues here at the Université de Laval, we educate about 80% of provinces agronomists. According to the statistics in the last decade, we educated 4 soil scientists per year for the whole province. That's for 80 or 90 agronomy graduates every year. That's minimal. That's right. There's a multitude of reasons for that. Obviously, soils are less sexy than a cow or a plant. It's not as exciting. Oh, well, it's dirt, whatever. Not the way you talk about it. I must now interrupt you because you will forgive me, but there's only a couple of minutes left in the meeting, and I wanted to bring up a couple other things in 30 seconds. In the last little bit, do you see a link between soil microbiota and human microbiome? Yes, there are parallels to be drawn between them. In human, the microbiome has a lot of control over certain parameters of our health and the development of certain diseases, according to what I have learned. And according to what Marie-Élise has presented, it appears to be the same about soils. There are parallels to be drawn. That life in the soil is what gives us all the positive results. Now, we were talking about the agriculture as such, but as non-farmers, we're pretty far from soil health. We just hope, but we crossed our fingers that farmers are adopting sustainable practices and that will be able to give us healthy food. But as a non-farmer, on a very small scale, is there anything that we can do to contribute to soil health? A comment from each of you before we close.
Either through their choices or in their own backyard. One thing that Marie-Élise said at the start that really struck me, it's the comparison between soil health and human health, both in terms of its complexity. You could never say that we know that someone is in good health just by looking at them. There's so many elements. It's so complex and a context to know as well. But also the association that we often make between human health and the socioeconomic situation or poverty that leads to the fact that some populations are in less good health. I think that when we leave to farmers that whole duty of maintaining soil health to attenuate climate change without placing value and placing a real value on that work, on the work of nourishing their communities and feeding their communities, the results will be the same as the ones that we see in terms of the population, the health of populations. That is well said, Rébeka. Thank you. Vincent, the last word to you. Yes, well, an advice that you might offer. I would advise people to take up their own practices, but to encourage farmers who do take up those practices. If you change your way of buying products, your way of shopping, it will have a real impact on the future of agriculture. If we may all be all for better agriculture, but if nobody reflects it in their purchasing, you won't see any progress. So if all the farmers on this planet provide the food that is asked of them. So if we're asked for healthier, better quality food, it will change practices and directly in the field. That's my best advice to you. If you can do it at home, it's great. You'll really have a great time. You really want to do agriculture, but it's not by buying food to encourage healthy agriculture. You have to change your consumption choices. And when I work with industry, I repeat it a lot, how the degree extent where consumers have such a great power that they don't always realize. You're right, though. Supply and demand is really closely tied. When we push on this, and we've seen it a lot, the shift will happen. And in the meantime, it takes people who are passionate about this and committed, who will do it because you believe in it. It's part of your value set. And with that, Rébeka and Marie-Élise, Vincent, thank you for having shared with such generosity in terms of your experience tonight. I hope that it pleased you. I hope it nourished you, and as well as everyone who was able to participate.